The main attraction today will be American philosophy, pragmatism. But did I mention when Nietzsche came down, actually Zarathustra in his writing comes down from the mountaintop and says to the people, God is dead. Did I talk about that at all? I thought not. I mean, that's probably you're familiar with at least a couple of lines associated with Nietzsche. One is, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. May I point out that Nietzsche is dead, just so you know. In fact, an old bathroom thing, you see on the wall, God is dead, Nietzsche, and then underneath it, Nietzsche is dead, God, So it's hilarious. But then the whole point, what does he mean by God is dead? Well, number one, it's Zarathustra, Zoroaster, the prophet from Persia, way back before Jesus, really. And perhaps the basis for the idea that there's a good and evil force fighting in the universe. But in any case, what Nietzsche is talking about is he comes down and Zoroaster addresses the people and he says, God is dead. And they all look at him like, who the hell are you? Basically. And Zoroaster says, I've come too soon. These people are not ready for this. Well, what Nietzsche is clearly talking about is the Übermensch, the idea that the individual has come to realize that all the stories, the narratives, the meta-narratives that traditionally are believed that depict a deity as the ruler, an old guy sitting, with a beard, usually on a throne in space, probably, just dumb. It's dumber now than it used to be. You can imagine when people thought the Earth was flat, and that this was it, and they didn't know that the universe was so large. The idea of a typical ruler would be someone who everybody comes to for judgments, and he's usually sitting on a throne of some sort. Usually an old guy, probably, relatively speaking. But the idea, really is built on a traditional Christian motif that Jesus dies on the cross, and Jesus is God, and so God has died for our sins, right? That's a typical Christian motif, right? And Martin Luther, God is dead. We have killed him. It's our fault that he's died, because he's died to, retrieve us from the fall, right? But if you think of it that way, you're still thinking that there is a individual who is somehow God and has died, even if he's resurrected. What Nietzsche, I'm pretty sure, is really talking about is that the reason for our having the belief, the narrative, in the first place is no longer there. We no longer need these kinds of stories. We've evolved to the next stage, so to speak. He does follow the theory of evolution. I think you asked last class, did he follow Hegel? And I don't recall any real indication that Nietzsche was a big Hegel fan. But he is a Darwin. He's not a fan of Darwin because he disagrees with a lot of things Darwin says. But Darwin has definitely motivated him. He definitely accepts the idea of evolution, but he disagrees that evolution has no point, has no teleology. For Nietzsche, it does have the same kind of thing that that Hegel really does argue, and that is that history has a point, it has an end, a goal in mind, and that is increase in freedom politically for individuals, and that happens because of our education. And the more people that are educated, the more people have that kind of freedom. So for Hegel, a philosophy of history describes, the earliest civilizations as nobody's really free. Then the emperor is free, then the Senate is free. So there's, as he looks through the various historical periods, and yes, he is famous for thinking that Africa is a dark continent. Dark, not because, of course, there's no sunlight, but because it's not enlightened, right? So when you think of the Enlightenment and you associate that with Kant and was ist Aufklärung, which is really not enlightenment, it's a clearing up, but it always gets translated as enlightenment. Even recently we've had Steven Pinker write a book, Enlightenment Now. Let us have enlightenment, says Steven Pinker. I'll do that here. Just so you see the Enlightenment Now, a case for reason, science, and so forth. So enlightenment. So when Hegel says Africa is a dark continent, he's talking about it's not enlightened. It doesn't have the same kind of education that enables individuals to become the advanced intellect. I wouldn't want to say the Übermensch, because that's Nietzsche, and I don't know what Hegel would have thought about the whole concept of the Übermensch. But of course, there was education in Africa. And where in Africa are you talking? Because of course, if we talk about Egypt and the northern areas of Africa, there's of course very early civilizations. I suspect eventually we're going to discover that under the Sahara Desert was a humongous civilization that got buried because they had global warming and dried themselves up because they didn't take care of their natural resources, and they overpopulated, and eventually nature just covered it all over with sand. And one of these days we'll be able to spot with our devices that, hey, there's cities under here. Wouldn't that be neat? And find all kinds of culture, all kinds of literature, maybe even a science that enables people to take rocks and smooth them out so that they all fit nicely into all of the different kinds of pyramids and things that they've made all over the world. By the way, they're not just in Egypt. So I mean that's just one. There's all kinds of other kingdoms and so on. So it was just a dumb thing on Hegel's part that he thought Africa had no enlightenment. He didn't know. He had no what source of insight into what things might have gone on there, and we're still learning. But so Nietzsche is really. I should go at least to my notes on Nietzsche and make sure where he was born. We talked about all of that. Headaches, suffered a mental breakdown. By the way, the mental breakdown occurs on a street in Venice, I believe, where he's staying for his health. And he sees a wagon, and the horse has collapsed, and the driver is just out there beating the horse, trying to get it to get back up. And Nietzsche runs out and hugs the horse by the neck to block the driver from hitting it any further. And he's in tears, and he never recovers. He ends up going from there into a mental institution, and when he's finally released from there, he's sent to his sister, who basically takes care of him the rest of his life, etc. So, Nietzsche, who was especially fond of Greek culture, as I kind of emphasized, for him the ethical was more highlighted by the Greeks than Christianity. The breakup between him and I mentioned Richard Wagner in connection with Schopenhauer, because Wagner liked Schopenhauer and tried to impress Schopenhauer with his work dedicated to the concept of the will, and Schopenhauer thought it was horrible, but Nietzsche was absolutely impressed with Wagner, and some of his early writings were in honor of Wagner. But then they did have a famous breakup between them. It really occurred when Nietzsche attended the festival at Bayreuth. Bayreuth. Did I spell that right? So this is a theater built by Wagner for his operas. It had the most modern stage ever up to that time. It used to have the stage could rotate, different things. All they could have the dragon come out and fight. The horses flying in. It was technical. But the theater itself was just basic wood and seats, which made it a perfect speaker system for the music. God bless you. Gesundheit, since we're doing German at the moment. And if you sneeze again, I should say, Auf Wiedergesund. Another health to you. So the Bayreuth Festival. There's some fantastic stuff there. And as I mentioned, the music is great. And yet, clearly, Wagner was an anti-Semite. And I hinted that some of the music actually depicts the dwarves clearly as if they were the Jewish caricature, and they're the evil ones, etc. So there's definitely anti-Semitism there, which makes you think, gee, should I really enjoy Wagner when he's such an anti-Semite? One help to this is that lots of Wagner is performed in Israel by orchestras there. That's interesting, I suppose. So he's a friend of Richard Wagner, but there is a breakup, and they say that the breakup occurred because he was at the Bayreuth Festival and thought Wagner was a real Übermensch, and when he saw who the crowd was, who the audience was, the wealthy, the elite, and Wagner was really catering to them, he realized he's not an Übermensch. He's playing to the crowd. That's not what I mean. And so that caused a breakup. But others will also say that part of the breakup was because Wagner was an anti-Semite and Nietzsche wasn't. And I am not sure of that at all. So we could still argue over that. There's another theme that Nietzsche brings up called the eternal recurrence. And I'm not really sure what that is, but the way most people interpret it is the idea that the universe keeps recycling. And each time it recycles, it's actually doing exactly the same thing. So everything you're doing now, you've done before and will continue doing in a cyclical fashion for all eternity. And yet at the same time, so he says, so thinking that way, would you behave differently if you were knowing that what you were doing now is what you've always been doing in the past and the future? That everything eternally recurs. I remember when reading it, though, my first impression was that it was kind of like what Madonna interprets it, meaning that you can't let society kind of control you, and so what you have to do is eternally recreate, something. But I suspect that interpretation is not what Nietzsche meant. It was my early interpretation, but probably not, because everybody agrees that it's this other theory, which occurred, I think, at the rock. I think you saw the picture of the rock. There's a great video with what's her name? I can't think of her name right now. I don't know. That's the age thing. No, my wife Donna? I can remember her name. The Hemlock Cup. There it is. Bethany Hughes. Okay. Where was I? Okay, I guess it was here. How'd that happen? Ah.
In 1850, Nietzsche, age 13, quiet but prodigiously academic, won a scholarship here to one of the most prestigious boarding schools in Germany. A former Cistercian abbey, Pforta would be the place that nourished many of Nietzsche's philosophical interests. Nietzsche believed that what he learned here formed him, both as a thinker and as a man.
Interesting BBC have the person walking, talking, then the end of scene.
Yes, we know, because we have his school report here. You see here?
That is brilliant. I never thought I'd see Nietzsche's school report.
It is.
And there it is, Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche.
Absolutely. You see here the different topics he was taught in. First, we have the religion. And this is interesting, because you would probably not expect Nietzsche to be a brilliant student.
So you get the idea. There's BBC presentations. They're wonderful. And she's really good.
Society could be transformed through a sense of the collective.
That's the festival house.
Go out and change the world.
Wagner's theatre was a temple to his brilliance, but it was also the place where Nietzsche fell violently out of love with his hero. When Nietzsche came here to watch a performance of Wagner's opera The Ring, he hated what he found. Rather than a place of revolution, the theatre was stuffed with the great and the good of Europe. And the man that he revered as a radical, who he thought would catalyse the birth of a brave new world, was just the hero of a self-satisfied festival of opera, revelling in his own glory. Nietzsche stormed out of the theatre mid-performance. It marked the beginning of the end of their friendship. and a new phase in Nietzsche's philosophical quest.
Hope you don't mind my I like the way she does things,
The
and
book is a parable on the importance of self-overcoming.
thus baby Zarathustra.
The imagery is of the mountains.
Notice the
and
music
figure
too, by
of
the way.
Zarathustra echoes Nietzsche himself. Two of its
That's the
forwards
place
were
where he
written
wrote
here,
most
in the
of
guest house where Nietzsche often stayed.
It is remarkable being here, isn't it? Because it's in this
And that's
book
the room.
that Nietzsche wrote one of his most groundbreaking and influential works.
This is the place where he first had the ideas about that's called Zarathustra. Zarathustra is a prophet who comes down the mountain and he wants to talk to people in a town about this great event that God is dead, that Christianity, with all its certain universal absolute moral values, is no longer believed in, and that the question of what it is to be human and how one is to live as a human needs to be answered anew. But nobody listens to Zarathustra.
And one of the mechanisms to doing that is this difficult concept that you
So there you go. You get the idea. I wanted to finish up at least a little bit with Nietzsche because he's very popular today. Remember, he wasn't considered a real philosopher for quite a long time in the United States and England because he was not focused on language analysis. So let's move on to Bertrand Russell. Did I want to do Bertrand Russell? We do need to do him, but Quine, I'm too far ahead here. I happen to